Ferris from Wood Library, but I'm not really here from Wood Library today. I'm here promoting something with the Community Reading Partnership. Coming up on October 2nd, that's a Saturday, from 10 until 2, we're going to be having a Children's Book Fest at Finger Lakes Community College. This is the third one we've had, and we are delighted to be having some local authors here for you to come, meet, do some crafts with, and listen to them read their stories. So I'm going to turn this over to my very special guest right now. Her name is Vivian Vande Velde, and she is an author.
Thank you, Mary. I am going to talk to you a little bit about writing, and then I am going to read a little bit to you, and then Mary is going to, I'm sorry, I should say Ms. Ferris, is going to be showing you how to do a craft based on one of my books. But a lot of times people will ask, what is the best way to get started writing? And my answer to that is you need to read a lot if you're going to write. Now, a lot of authors will give you that same advice, so I am going to kind of expand on that a little bit. When you're reading, decide what you like and what you don't like about the book that you're reading. If you're liking a book, I am guessing that it is probably because you like the character. Is it because the character is brave and sassy the way you wish you could be? Or is the character kind of mild and meek and yet still comes out on top, and that's what you're wishing for? Is it that you really like the action and adventure in the story, or maybe there's puzzles? But I'm guessing that you still probably are most interested if you like the characters. It could be that you like the setting. Maybe the setting is in Canandaigua, and you'd say, hey, I know about Canandaigua, I live there. And so it's fun for you to notice the references to Canandaigua. So, for example, my character could visit Wood Library. I might try to disguise Wood Library, though. I might call it something else. If, for example, I decided that the library needed to be haunted, I might say, let's not call it Wood, let's call it Pine Library, so that the people who work at the library don't say, nobody's coming to our library anymore because they're afraid of seeing the ghosts. So sometimes authors will use a particular setting, but also change it a bit. Another of the reasons that you might like a book is because you like the questions that it gets you thinking about. So, for example, in a story that might be set in World War II, where the characters are breaking the laws and stealing things and lying, you might start wondering, when is it all right to do that? And so if you're like that kind of story, then bring up those kind of questions in what you're writing. You think about what it is that's on your mind, and you write that. The other way that reading a book can go is that you don't like the book. And one of the reasons that you don't like a book is because the characters are acting in a way that you think makes absolutely no sense. For example, the character, and it's usually a girl, is home alone, it's usually at night, in a house, and she hears a strange noise coming from the basement. And she says, oh, I think I'll go into the basement and figure out what that noise is. And you're saying, don't go in the basement. It doesn't do any good to say no reasonable person would go in the basement. You have to figure out, if you were writing the story, how would you have the story continue and yet at the same time not have the character do something that you don't think is believable. So you might say, well, she wouldn't go down in the basement, she would call for help. Yeah, but then she has to hope that whatever's in the basement can't get to her before the help arrives. So maybe that's not going to work. Maybe she needs to go into her room and lock the door and hope that whatever's in the basement isn't strong enough to knock down the door, or doesn't have the ability to turn into mist and seep under the door. Or you could say, okay, so that's not going to work. She needs to leave the house. But as the author, you need to make things difficult for her, and you'd say, what if the closest house is not all that close, and what if she needs to cross the cemetery before she gets to that other house? So that's one way that you can kind of exercise your brain and figure out what you would be writing by figuring out what works and what doesn't work in other people's stories. I'm hoping that you're not finding things that don't work when I read you a little bit from Squirrel in the Museum. I will hide my Post-it notes that are showing me what I want to read. It is the third book in this series about Twitch the squirrel, and chaos is in this title, but you can tell from all of the covers that pretty much chaos follows Twitch wherever he goes. Okay, Twitch the schoolyard squirrel. I am a very highly educated squirrel. I always paid attention to my mother's life lessons. Some of my mother's life lessons: don't let an owl eat you. Don't let a weasel eat you. Don't let a fox eat you. Don't let a wolf eat you. So Twitch talks a little bit about how he, being a squirrel, I mean, he doesn't realize that this is why, but being a squirrel that lives in a park in the city, he has never seen wolves. And he's talking to the geckos that are also nearby because they are pets. Class pets that get actually introduced in this book. They belong in the science lab, and they tell him there is a field trip of kids going to the Galileo Museum of Science, and we wish we could go because they're going to have all their scientific questions answered. And he starts thinking, maybe I could find out about wolves if I go there. So he sneaks onto the bus before the kids get there, and then he's hiding under the seats, and he hides in a girl's backpack. And he's in the backpack when the kids go into the museum, and they start saying cool. But they're saying it in such an excited and pleased-sounding way that after several of them add the word dinosaurs, I remember people sometimes use the word cool to indicate they like something. I also know the word dinosaurs. On the playground, sometimes children talk about dinosaurs or read books to tell about them. I have climbed to a branch above where the children sit when they choose to sit quietly rather than running and climbing and sliding, and I have looked down at the pictures in those books. Dinosaurs are animals, except they aren't make-believe animals. I know this because I've never seen a dinosaur, and other squirrels I've asked have never heard of them. This makes them different from the wolves, which we haven't seen in as long as any of us can remember, but which squirrel mothers still warn about, and which I am going to be learning all about at the museum today. Squirrels don't make up animals. We have enough to worry about with owls and weasels and foxes. But sometimes the people teachers read books to the children about make-believe creatures. Besides dinosaurs, these include dragons and unicorns and kittens that sparkle. In fact, dinosaurs and dragons are clearly related to each other, and not just honorary cousins like me and the geckos. The difference is that in the stories, dragons talk and fly and breathe fire and have all sorts of exciting adventures. Dinosaurs pretty much just eat each other. So the kids are excited about this dinosaur exhibit, and Twitch decides that he needs to see what's going on, so he pokes his head out of the backpack, and he sees that there is this Tyrannosaurus Rex in front of him. He says, I've seen pictures of T-Rex, and I realize that's who is standing before me. Well, actually, he's standing before the little girl with the pink backpack. I'm behind her, peeking over her shoulder. The little girl must be a fan of the adventures of T-Rex, for she steps closer, even though he has a reputation for being very fierce. If she's going to engage in risky behavior, maybe it's time for me to leave the backpack. Although T-Rex isn't moving at the moment, he's looking right at us with glassy eyes, and his jaws are enormous and filled with pointy teeth. I suspect he could swallow both of us in one bite. And then the children who are reading this book will understand what's going on, but Twitch always misinterprets everything. The museum worker says that they have a animatronic dinosaur. And he says, just to make your experience more memorable, our animatronic specialists have added voice and movement. This museum worker uses words that are too big. The teachers would know better. He will lose the interest of the children, who can become bored very easily. But before there is a chance of that, he pushes a button and T-Rex roars, swinging his massive head and snapping his jaws. The children shriek. Even the adults gasp. I am not afraid. Squirrels are very brave. But squirrels are also very smart. It is not smart to stand in front of something that is roaring at you. I scramble out of the backpack and onto the head of the girl in pink so that I can leap to safety. The girl, who had not been one of the ones to scream at a dinosaur roaring at her, now screams at having a squirrel on her head. She also starts bouncing in place. This makes me bounce too, which makes it hard for me to get my footing for my jump. Even if squirrels ate little girls, which they do not, I could not swallow her in a single bite the way a dinosaur could, so I don't understand why she is more frightened of me than of the dinosaur. Meanwhile, the other children are not paying attention to the screaming girl. Their shrieks have turned to laughter. Again, they cry at the museum worker, "Make him do it again." This is because T-Rex is not a living creature. He is a very big, very noisy toy. I'd forgotten that for a moment. The only one who hasn't stopped screaming is the little girl whose head I'm sitting on. She's flapping her arms in the air, not swatting at me, but like a chicken trying to take off. People finally notice that she's still screaming, still bouncing. They turn to her, they point, they say, "What's that on your head?" "I don't know," she screams. Well, this explains why she's upset. Since I climbed up the back of her head, she must not realize that I'm a squirrel. Still, I'm amazed at the lack of education shown by the other students who can't recognize what I am, unless they can't see because of all her hair or because of all her bouncing. Even though people can't understand squirrel, though squirrels can understand people, I lean close and make the chittering sound in her ear that means squirrel. Even if she doesn't know the meaning of the word, she should be able to recognize what kind of animal is speaking. The girl is not reassured. "Get it off! Get it off! Get it off!" Climbing out of her backpack and on her head probably was not my wisest decision. "It's a squirrel," someone shouts. "Stop making such a fuss." I look over and see the boy in the movable chair. He calls over to the girl, "He's probably more scared of you than you are of him." I'm not scared at all. I was only startled for a moment by the dinosaur's roar. The girl doesn't believe him either, and she doesn't stop screaming. Some of the teachers' chaperones are heading in our direction, in that fast walk teachers often use at the same time they're saying, "Now you're in trouble." So I leap off the girl's head and run. And he gets involved with a whole bunch of the museum exhibits, and as I say, no chaos in this title, but a lot of chaos in the book itself. Squirrels aren't the only animals that I write about. I also have written a story called Three Good Deeds, which is about a boy, even though there's a goose on the cover. It's about a boy who gets turned into a goose. I was just going to read a real short section where that happens. Howard, the misbehaving boy, has gone to the yard, which includes a pond, of a woman who has a reputation of being a witch. He didn't believe this. And he's stealing the goose eggs, and the witch catches him at it, and she says, "You, young man, are in serious need of a good lesson." He saw the old witch's lips move as she said something he could not hear, and then he felt something unlike anything he'd ever felt before. It was as though a huge wind was suddenly intent on blowing Howard off his feet, and all the while the wind shoved at him. Something was striking him, something softer than hail, but harder than snow. What it was, Howard couldn't tell, because there was nothing in the air he could see. The sensation didn't hurt, but it was certainly unpleasant. Like feathers, Howard thought. It was like lots and lots and lots of feathers landing on him, except that he couldn't see any feathers, and neither could he see anything besides himself being affected by the wind that was trying so hard to topple him. The trees were still, the grass did not ripple, the clothes of the old witch standing before him were not flapping. Strange, Howard thought, and while thinking that, he lost his concentration, and the wind succeeded in knocking him to his bottom. "Oof," he puffed, and even in that first moment, some part of him recognized his voice had come out louder than he'd expected, and more sharp and nasal. It also seemed, even though he was sitting down, that the old witch was much too tall, looming over him, or rather, he was much too short. "Hey," Howard tried to say. In his mind, he could hear the word perfectly, but to his ears, it definitely came out as honk. So, with that in mind, can you lead us in a craft?
Yes, we just want to give you a taste of what's going to be happening at the book fest. So, this is my favorite book of Vivian, so I kind of coerced her into reading it. But I found a really fun goose craft. So, if you come to the book fest, We have 11 craft stations around the room, and each one is a little bit different, but all tied to somebody's book, somebody who's at the book fest. So for this one, all you need is a paper plate, some yellow or orange cardstock or construction paper, a googly eye, a glue stick, a pencil, and some scissors. So the first thing you're going to do is fold your paper plate in half. Pinch it on just one side and go across until you get to where the rim starts going up, and then stop. And then open it up, and you're going to cut right along that line you just pinched. And then you're going to cut around that rim. Almost looks like a letter G. You want it to look a little bit more like a G for goose. So we're going to trim it up a little bit. And I'm just doing it freehand. You can feel free to do it with a pencil first. Let's get that up just a little bit because geese have very long curved necks. All right, just like that. Then you're going to take your one piece of your paper and you're going to make a triangle. And to give you an idea of what your triangle needs to look like for his beak, just trace around it. Doesn't have to be perfect. Like that. And then cut it out. And I'm actually going to turn my goose around this way so that I'm working on the bottom of the plate, because very often the top of the plate has a finish on it and the glue won't stick. So if we put it on the back, it'll stick fine. So just put a little bit of glue on it. Like that. You're going to give it an eye. And then he needs some legs. And we're going to be making what I call a vegetable soup letter. I'm going to make a letter L, and I'm going to do it on this paper. Looks like that. And to make it easy for myself, I'm going to fold the paper in half so I can cut 2 feet with just one cutting. And I'm going to cut a little bit inside the line I drew because there is no line on the other one, so we don't want that pencil line to show. So now I have 2 feet, and all I have to do is just attach them on the bottom. So I'll use my glue stick again. Right underneath. And there's Howard trying to figure out how he's going to get away from that witch. So I think that's really all we needed to be saying. We're going to be having 11 authors and illustrators at the Book Fest. It's totally free. There will be a bookstore there. Sulphur Books from Clifton Springs will be there, so if your family wants to buy some books, you can.
But you don't have to.
You don't have to. You will all get an activity book when you come. You'll also, as I said, have a chance to meet and talk with the authors and illustrators, do a craft with them, and see how they came about to be writers.
And I promise not to put a spell on anybody who comes to my table.